Gene, don't you turn us off. Gene Luter is she's not going to turn it off. I've got one more song? Okay. Gene Luter is one of those folks that I have come to appreciate and love. I often refer to as my mother figure here at North River. She's a nurturer. She's kind of a person that takes you under your wing, and she's an encourager, and just love her. And I'm glad she's doing so well, and we rejoice in that today. You know, we got spoiled this week. Did you know that? Did anybody know what I'm talking about? The what? Oh, yeah. Wasn't it great when it got up there to the 70s? You know, I put on a short sleeve shirt and I walked outside and said, oh. I did. And I found myself just really embracing the warmth, embracing the brightness. And Jan was kind of sick the first part of the week, and so I had to walk alone on Tuesday. And Tuesday, I kind of put on a short sleeve shirt and some short pants and went over to the park and was walking. And man, I was just enjoying the walk. I had my headphones on. I need to wear those when I walk with her. Then no, never mind. But I had my headphones on, and I had my worship on. You know what I mean by that? I just found myself being caught up in the moment. I was walking. It was beautiful. The sun was shining. It felt warm. Everybody that I passed said hi. They were friendly. No dogs barked at me. It was just a beautiful moment. And while I was walking, a song played in my ears, and I got caught up in worshiping where nothing else really mattered. I was singing, and people began to stare at me because I had the headphones in and didn't realize that I was singing out loud. But I found myself captured in that song, it is well with my soul. And I kind of thought, it is. I really feel that way, that it's well within my soul. And Horatio Spafford, when he wrote that song, had lost his whole family, his wife and several daughters, to a ship that had gone down to sea. And the words, "It is well with my soul," were penned as the ship he was on was passing the spot where he had lost his family. I can't imagine that. Maybe, you know, the captain said, here's the spot that ship went down, and he began to be at resolve with himself. It's okay. It is well with my... Maybe he had gone through a struggle. Maybe he had gone through grief. Maybe there had been an impact in his life for losing his whole family. But there he stood, maybe with the sun shining, the ship passing by, and he penned the words, it is well with my soul. And then all of a sudden, God began to speak. He said, are you hearing this? And I said, uh-huh. And he said, wouldn't this be a wonderful part of your concert of prayer this summer? And I said, uh-huh. And I couldn't wait to get home to call Courtney and say, Courtney, we're going to add a new element to the concert of prayer. I'll bring the song to you. We'll play it. Macy's going to be a part of it. She doesn't know yet, by the way. Macy's going to be a part of it. You know, and there's all this really, and in my mind, God was just saying, here is not what's happening today, but what's happening today is going to impact what's going to happen this summer. I believe that's what it means when Paul says to the Ephesians, walk as children of light. If you read chapter 5, in chapter 5, Paul makes a statement there. Now, we're going to come to it in just a few moments. But he makes a statement where he says, you're to walk, first of all, walk worthy of your calling, and we already talked about that. But I also want you to walk as children of the light. What does that mean? Does that mean I'm walking in the sunshine of His love? Does it mean that I feel the warmth of His presence? Does it mean that it impacts not only what's happening in my life today, but maybe what God's going to be doing in my tomorrows? That walking as children of light becomes a lifestyle for us. And I want us to hear that as being one of the big things that should take place in our lives. Every one of us are going to live by some kind of philosophy. Every one of us are going to choose some things that are important to us on how we live our lives. Some people choose to live their lives in a certain way. Let me make as much money as I humanly possibly can. Some people live their lives in serving people. Some people live their lives all around family. But oftentimes there are these things that kind of rise to the surface, and they become our philosophies of life. For those of us who are followers of Christ, we should walk as children of light. And I want to try to expound that today and help us understand what that means, and then to challenge you to do that. So and I'm going to take several passages today from Ephesians chapter 4 and 5. The first one will show up on the screen, but the others you're just going to have to open up your Bibles and kind of follow along with me when we get to those chapters. But go to chapter 4 for a moment and look down to verse 17. There is a call here. Paul says that there's a call, that there's a calling that should bring about a change in our life. Think about that change for a moment of moving out of darkness into light. Think about it moving out of winter into spring. Think about it of moving out of death unto life. All of those analogies are used there, but there's always this general calling that we're supposed to have a moment in our lives of change. Verse 17, chapter 4. So this I say and affirm together with the Lord, that you walk no longer just as the Gentiles also walk, in the futility of their mind, being darkened in their understanding, excluded from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the hardness of their heart. And they, having become callous, have given themselves over to sensuality for the practice of every kind of impurity with greediness. Now, I want us to understand something here. He is associating the world of Gentiles, which is really more of the pagan environment. The chosen people of God were supposedly the Jews, and out of everything else was supposed to be considered paganism at that point. And he identifies all of the Gentiles as living this kind of lifestyle. I believe that applies to every one of us, that all of us have lived this life of being in darkness. We've lived this life walking in the futility of our own mind. We've lived this life excluding the life of God entirely from our lives. The life of darkness means that I'm being guided by my own mind. I'm making decisions based upon what I think is important to me, what I think is going on around me. Sometimes the worst thing that a Christian can say, my opinion is. The reality is our opinion doesn't matter. That the only really opinion that matters in our lives is God's opinion. And that when we begin to live according to our own mindfulness, we're living in darkness at that point. We're walking in darkness. Think about the idea of having a life that excludes God in its entirety. I believe that's the difference between heaven and hell. I believe that the difference between heaven and hell is not fire and brimstone. I believe that the difference from heaven and hell is one is where God's present, and one, God is absent. God no longer exists here. One of the aspects of hell that's described in the Bible, and by the way, we have allowed a book called Dante's Inferno to define for us what hell is, and maybe we need to get back to some biblical concepts. There are 5 different concepts that describe hell in the Bible, and we're not going to go into all of those today, but one of them is this. One of them is, and Jonathan Edwards, by the way, one of the great revivalists in the United States, built a whole sermon on this, that we're holding God, and at some point we choose to let go of God's hand. And when we do, we begin to fall. And we begin to move further and further and further and further and further away from God. And what happens is hell becomes a bottomless pit. This idea that we continually move further away from God until there's no presence of God in our lives whatsoever. Many of us start living that life right now. We exclude God out of our lives right now and don't even realize the impact that makes as day after day after day after day, we're not moving closer to God, we're moving further and further and further and further away. Jonathan Edwards described the moment of death as when we've let go of God and can grasp His hand no longer. That death without God is when we've let go of His hand and we can no longer grasp it again. We just fall further and further away. We begin that now. Living in darkness means that God is absent in our lives. We have to come to the place where we recognize the futility of our own mind, but we need to understand that darkness is ignorance outside of God. That this ignorance means that we have left God completely out, and God is the one that brings light to our lives and helps us to understand what life is all about. I can't imagine trying to live life realizing that God's not a part of it. I have a hard time in my mind discerning what it would be like to not have a hope of eternity. I would see my life as being futile. I went to a funeral service this week, and it was an amazing funeral service. Graveside service. My son-in-law's grandmother had passed away. They called her Me Mama, and Me Mama was one of those ladies that was probably as close to God as I think that you can possibly get. And she rode a motorcycle every now and then, so that made her even a notch better in my book. But she was one of those folks that the pastor said, I'm not writing this funeral. Me Mama wrote this funeral with her life. And then he began to talk about all of her attributes. I heard a trio of women singing Amazing Grace, My Chains Are Gone. It's one of my favorite songs. And I was just kind of caught up in that. I watched a 2-year-old boy sing How Great Thou Art. 2-year-old. And they bring him up there and they put him in front of the casket, and I go, oh gosh, no. And then all of a sudden I'm thinking, whoa. Amazing, no, how great thou art. Oh, Lord my God, how great thou art. And he sang it all the way through. I didn't even know the words. He did. And I thought to myself, wow, we're being led by a child. Just think if you didn't have that knowledge. Just think if death was just the end. No amazing grace, my chains are gone. No, how great thou art. No hope of what is yet to come. No assuring words that God brings us into His presence. Can you imagine how difficult that must be? I did a funeral service one time where the funeral home director called me and said, Pastor Steve, I've got a unique situation. I need for somebody to come and do a funeral for this man. His relatives have paid for it, and they've asked that a pastor be present. And the only two people that showed up for that funeral was the funeral home director and myself. Had chairs set out for family and friends, but no one showed up. I looked at the funeral home director and I said, what should we do? He said, they paid for you to do a funeral. And so I prayed, said some words, and we walked away. That was so dark. That was so hopeless for me. That was so absence of the presence of God. That's what Paul says our lives used to be like. But what he says is that we should embrace a new identity. That you should put those kind of things aside. Be renewed in your mind. Let your mind no longer be what you think, but let your mind be guided by what God thinks. Put on a new self that's created in righteousness. Put on a whole new person of who you are. Now, by the way, when a person gets saved, they don't automatically become somebody different. They do and they don't. They become a new creation. They become, their priorities change. Their perspective changes. Their awareness of God changes. And that's something that has to happen. If we're going to walk as children of light, we have to no longer embrace this, but we need to start embracing this. Embracing the newness. I like spring, and I kind of want it to be here. This morning when I got up, I had to put a sweater on. I asked Jan when I got out of bed this morning, is this snowing? You know, all of a sudden it's cold again. And I realized that we go through these periods of times where there's going to be this darkness, and there's going to be this coldness, and there's going to be this absence of God. But what drives us is that we have a desire for God. We have a desire for His warmth. We have a desire for His light. And we keep moving back towards that. Put on a new self, one that is seeking to be righteous in God. Then jump with me down to verse 20. He says, not only are you called to change, but there's a conduct of life that you're supposed to live. Look verse 20 with me. But you did not learn Christ in this way. In other words, you didn't learn Christ in this kind of environment. You learned Christ in this new way of walk. If indeed you have heard him and have been taught in him, just as truth is in Jesus, that in reference to your former manner of life, you lay aside the old self, which is being corrupted in accordance with the lust of deceit, and that you be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and put on the new self, which in the likeness of God has been created in righteousness and holiness and truth. We are to live our lives putting on a new self. It means that we live in a sense of integrity. It means that we are truthful with one another, and we avoid this idea of falseness and deceit. In this former life over here, in darkness, we deceived one another. We were not truthful with one another. We were not living in fellowship with one another. But when I put on this new self, I changed the conduct of my life, so much so that integrity becomes something that I am aware of. And I want to live my life with a certain sense of integrity. Okay? That in reference to your former manner of life, you lay aside the old self, which is being corrupted in accordance with the lust and deceit, and that you, in the spirit of your mind, you put on a new self. And that new self is holiness and truth. It's a sense of integrity. We're seeing what darkness is doing to our world every day as people that we respect continue to lose integrity. When people that we used to look up to are no longer people of integrity. And I'm not talking about any one grouping of people in particular. Just think about the world that you live in today and the integrity that has diminished almost in all areas of life. I talked to a guy the other day that said that he paid for something, and then when he realized that the person had given them more money in change than what they had deserved. They had paid for something, and he said it was like $20 more. But that he went back in and gave the $20 back. That's integrity. Okay, that's saying $20. Oh, that's good. Now remember what it says up here. It says that walking in darkness, you have every kind of impurity with greediness. That oftentimes greediness is a characteristic of this dark life that we live. But being truthful and honest is a lifestyle that comes when we walk in the light. And that person said to me, I couldn't, it wasn't mine. I couldn't take that. I couldn't do that. Think about that for a moment, that the integrity that we're seeing today is not people walking in righteousness. It's not people walking in just good faith with one another. But that greediness has begun to take toll on us. He says that in that passage that we should demonstrate love, and that we should build up the body of Christ, and that we should have kindness and compassion. Walking in the light is demonstrated by our kindness and our compassion, which comes from our love. We love first, and love demands kindness. We love first, and it demands compassion. We love first, and it demands how we relate to other people, demonstrating that love as we go. I can really tell you, well, maybe I shouldn't say this. Sometimes it's easy to tell where a person's priorities are when you see how they love, when you see how kind they are, when you see how compassionate they are. I like to see it sometimes at restaurants. Sometimes at restaurants you will see somebody that is so self-centered that the waitress can do nothing right. You've seen them, haven't you? You've overheard their conversations. That's not kindness. That's not compassion. And yet some people live their lifestyles like that, where I never speak a word of kindness to somebody, but everything I say is always abrupt and angry and hurtful. I never see somebody with compassion, but I always see somebody with judgment. You see, there's a difference between walking in darkness, absent of God, and walking in the light where God's love is demonstrated. Last but not least, turn over to chapter 5 with me for a moment. In chapter 5, he says there's a celebration that goes on with walking in the light. For you are formerly darkness, but now you are light. Light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. For the fruit of the light consists in all goodness and righteousness and truth, trying to learn what is pleasing to the Lord. Do not participate in the unfruitful deeds of darkness, but instead even expose them. For it is disgraceful even to speak of the things which are done by them in secret. But all things become visible when they are exposed by the light. For everything that becomes visible is light. For this reason it says, awake, sleeper, and arise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. Pause there for a moment, underline that verse, let it sink in. That when you've been awakened and you arise from the dead, the light of Christ, Christ Himself, will shine on you. What does that mean? My life should be a reflector, not of my light, but of His light. And one of those songs that we teach our children, we need to go back and re-educate them. Okay? I found myself singing it this week, and I thought, oh my gosh, we got to change that. What is it? This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. Maybe we should change that to say, this big light of Christ, I'm going to let it shine. This big light of Christ, I'm going to let it shine. Folks, it's not that internal light that we have that is so easy for us to turn on and turn off that we're talking about here. We're talking about an immensity of Christ's presence in our life, so much so that He floods us with His light, and we have absolutely no other choice but to reflect that into the world in which we live. Someone told me I could see 7 planets in the skies on Friday night. Did you read that thing? And I went out and looked. And I looked. And I said, which ones? I tried to find 7 in a row, but that wasn't what you were supposed to do. See, I didn't quite understand what 7 planets in a row was. But what I did understand is that the people who understand that said these planets are reflecting light, and that's why you're able to see them. You can see Jupiter because it's bright. A gazillion miles away, and I can see Jupiter. Why? Because it's reflecting a great light. Folks, my walking in the light means that I make every day the most of the opportunities that God gives me. I understand the Lord's will. And the Lord's will is not what God is choosing for me to do that day. God's will has already been determined. He shows it to us, and then I get to be a part of it. Understand that. Those of you that are sitting back waiting for God to show you His will for your life, you're wasting time. You're spinning your wheels and you're wasting time. God's will does not come to us. We go to God's will. Do I need to repeat that? God's will never comes to us. We always go to God's will. In other words, God shows us His will, and He gives us an invitation. He says, come be a part of that. I love pastors that lie to us. And they'll say something like this, you know, my story is just like Jonah. I ran from God and I ran from God until God had to run me down and force me to be the preacher of the word. Hogwash. God does not need any one of us to accomplish His will. You are not that important that God would have to run you down and force you to do something against your will. What God says is, I'm opening up. This train's about to leave the station. It's going to go whether you're on it or you're not. But if you want to be a part of what I'm doing, you get on the train right now. If you want to be a part of God's will, you get on the train now. The train's going to go whether you're on it or not. God's will is going to be accomplished whether you're a part of it or not. What He does is, I'm giving you an opportunity to walk in the warmth of the light. I'm giving you an opportunity to walk in the presence of Christ Himself. I'm giving you the opportunity to feel the warmth of His love flowing through you into the lives of others. If you want to get on the train, now's the time to do it. We were talking this morning in our journey group that I believe God has great plans, and that God does things today that are going to impact tomorrow. He starts walking us here so that when we get here, we're able to accomplish what needs to be done here because of what happens there. And I used as an illustration, and Brooke, hope you don't mind, but I was talking about Brooke. Brooke was 3 years old when her brother died with cancer. And I spent an awful lot of time with Brooke's mom and daddy. I love your mom and dad, by the way. They're great people, and I enjoyed just being their pastor during that period of time. But what if, just play with me for a moment, 25 years ago, I would say, maybe right at 20 years ago, yeah, 25 years ago, somewhere in that time frame when Tyler passed away, what if God was doing something here that we're walking through right now? Out of all the people on the planet that I would have expected to walk through that door one Sunday, it wouldn't have been Brooke. Not because I didn't know her, not because I didn't love her, I never, ever thought that would happen. But it did. Her mother sent me a text one day and said, Brooke's in your area and looking for a church. And I said, well, give me her phone number. And I called Brooke. Said, Brooke, we got a 20-something group. If they don't scare you off, you might find out you might fit in with the group a little bit. But when she walked in the door, I wondered to myself, did this story begin back here? And Brooke, what I'm thinking is, what is it that's happening in your life or our life that God's bringing to fruition at this moment? Do you hear that? Do you understand that? Can you hold on to that for a few moments? That God began something here. Walking in the light meant something here because it's also going to mean something here. And I can't wait to find out what that is. I'm excited about that. We have missed way too many opportunities. First of all, because we're not really patient. And we need to be patient with God because God does things in His time and His way. But what He says to us, you guys just keep singing those songs. You just keep singing them hymns. Read the rest of that chapter 5. Sing hymns of joy to one another. What does it say? And give thanks in all circumstances. Walking in the light means that we're praising God every day and giving thanks. And just watching as He unfolds the story in front of us. I don't believe that walking in the light means being Baptist. I don't think walking in the light means being perfect. I don't think walking in the light means being mission-minded. I think walking in the light is a lifestyle that we accept. That the things of God are going to take priority in my life. That the things of God, when he shows them to me, I'm going to follow the pattern of Jesus. I'm going to see. Seeing is where God's will is unfolded for us. Okay, understand that. When you see something, it's God showing it to you. So don't come and tell me we need to do something again unless you're willing to do it, because God showed it to you. Understand what I mean? Pastor Steve, I think we should do something. I said, it's wonderful. When can you get started on it? I'm glad that God revealed that to you. Then all of a sudden, it kind of doesn't happen sometimes. What is it if God shows us? That's His will. Then it becomes a choice. It says that when Jesus saw the crowds, He had compassion. Walking in the light means that you are dominated by compassion and love. That you are directed by kindness and goodness and gentleness and all these things that the fruit of the Spirit have. So that when I see something, I just can't turn my back on it. Something inside of me says, I have compassion. A Samaritan got off of his donkey and went down to where a man had been robbed. He showed compassion after he saw the need. He had compassion on that man and then did something. Too many of us are waiting for God to show us what we're supposed to do when we're too lazy to get off the donkey. Let the water hit the wheel. That many times God's already shown us. God's already invited us. And instead of having compassion, we step back and say, no. And God says that's a missed opportunity. There's where the warmth is. That's where the light is. That's where I'm taking you. That's what I'm showing you. Have compassion and then get off your donkey and do something about it. That story is all through the Bible. It's repeated over and over and over again. You want to walk in the light? What do your eyes see when you look around you? What is it that God has revealed to you? What is it that God has shown to you? And where does your heart come into play? Do you have compassion? And then are you willing to roll up your sleeves and do something about that? That's walking in the light. Doesn't happen every day, but it could. But rest assured that God can do it without you. Rest assured that God can do it without you. His love for us is that He invites us to be a part. But we don't divert God's will by saying to Him, no. All we do is hurt ourselves. God's saying, I'm about to go on this ride. I'm about to do this thing. Come do it with me. In Disney this past summer, we got on a roller coaster. I've been on roller coasters before. Courtney's been on roller coasters before. We know what to expect. Elsie had never been on a roller coaster before. And so she looked at it and she said, I want to do that. And we all said, I bet. But she said, I want to do it. I want to do it. I want to do it. So we got in line. And the more we got in line, the more I realized, what have we done to this poor child? We're going to traumatize her. The whole future of her life is going down the tubes right now because we're about to scare the living daylights out of her. And we got on the roller coaster, and she got in the seat next to me, and she was just holding my hand, and then it got tighter. No, mine got tighter. And up that, that first hill, where it goes click, 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 click. I know what's coming. She doesn't. Do I tell her? Do I prepare her? By the time I thought about it, it was too late, and we're shoom. And there we went. We roller coastered and roller coastered and roller coastered. We got off, and the very first thing she said was, I want to do that again. And the person that was saying, no, I don't, is me. I don't want to do it again. That was about all that I could take. But she was so excited that she got in line again with a couple others, and she rode it a second time. Let me tell you something, folks. The things that we often fear the most are the most joyous opportunities in our lives. And unless we're willing to respond, we may never know the joy of finding out what God does for us and what God can do for us, even in the most uncertain and even in the most unpredictable moments of our lives. God says, get on the train. Get on the roller coaster. You just can't understand what joy is just beyond that first hill. The Father, please, 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 please help us to understand that walking in the light is something we choose. It's not something that you force upon us, but it's something you invite us to be. Leave your darkness behind, Paul says, and walk as children of light. Does that mean we're perfect? No, it just means we begin to become reflectors of Christ in our lives. That living for you becomes important. It becomes a priority. It becomes what we choose when choices have to be made. It's those opportunities to see and to have compassion and to do something about it. It's those moments when we feel the warmth of your love in our lives and are able to see that as it flows into the lives of others. And sometimes when the ride is finished, we turn around and say, oh gosh, we want to do that again. Please, God, don't ever leave us out of your will. Open our eyes and give us the compassion so that we might always find ourselves being involved in what it means to walk in the light, to live with a sense of integrity and honesty and truthfulness, to live our lives not being perfect, but rather struggling through as sinners saved by grace, to realize that when people look at us, they must see the Christ, and that must draw them, and that must invite them, and that must be what enlightens them. And that we would find great joy in that. In Christ our Lord we pray. Amen.